This is Ben Gillespie interviewing James Welling at his home on the 22nd of June, 2020 for the Smithsonian Institution Archives of American Art Pandemic Project. Would you like to tell me a little bit about how you've experienced 2020 so far?
Let's see. I was fortunate to have a show in Paris in January. So my wife and I went to Paris. Part of the show, the work is around antiquity. So while I was in Paris, I went to the Louvre 4 days in a row, where I saw lots and lots of tourists. I was in contact with a lot of tourists, and I also observed a lot of Chinese tourists. I assume were Chinese. Maybe they were from other Asian countries wearing masks, which I was aware of the pandemic at that point, or the impending pandemic, and but I didn't really take any precautions. I remember my wife was feeling ill one day, so I went to a French pharmacy and drew a picture of a mask. They were sold out. So that gave me a sense of, anyway, what might be on the roll. Then we went to London for a memorial for Peter Wolin. And thinking back now, if we were there a few weeks later, everyone might have gotten very sick. So, the pandemic was sort of on our minds, but it hadn't been named. I would read about it every day in the paper, but anyway, of course, retrospectively, the pandemic was on everyone's mind, even in January. I remember coming back on February 1st and getting very ill for 4 days. I'm generally in extremely good health. I don't think I've ever had the flu, but I was knocked out for 4 days coming back from Europe and had to cancel my first class at Princeton, which I've never done. Anyway, that was the beginning. That was January and February. Okay.
So how else have you felt the impact of COVID-19 in your life since then?
I just, in terms of the slow buildup, I think in beginning of March, Princeton canceled its classes on a Monday. My class was on a Wednesday, so I went in. In a way, it was very surprising and kind of shocking that at the beginning of the pandemic, almost everything that was being rolled out seemed absolutely inconceivable, that we wouldn't be able to go to class, that we would actually be sheltering in place. There was an amazing few weeks when, it dawned on me and my wife and friends that life was really, really radically changing. I think that was the biggest surprise, was every day you think this can't be that bad, but it actually was. So there's a lot of, coming to terms in the beginning. Then when we were essentially quarantined, the first few weeks were, of course, very surprising and a little depressing, scary, not a lot of information about how the virus was transmitted. So there's a lot of not high-level fear, but lots of low-level anxiety. I have to say that when I was 4 years old, I spent 3 months indoors in the summer of my fourth year with nephritis, which is a kidney disease. And I was treated and survived. But my brother, who also had it, we spent the entire summer indoors. My mom would make us picnics, and we'd sit in the living room rug with a blanket spread out and have an outdoor picnic. We weren't allowed to go outdoors for 3 months. And for a 4-year-old, this was very hard. The first few weeks of the pandemic, I said to my brother, it reminds us of when we had nephritis, because there was a lot of indoor activity. That said, I'm secure enough financially that the pandemic hasn't affected me at all. So I'm one of the very lucky people who have retired from UCLA, and I still teach at Princeton. I get Social Security. So in a way, economically, the pandemic hasn't affected me. I'm also someone who likes to spend a lot of time in my studio. I didn't understand exactly how time outside for doing various things also was important. So now I'm spending all my time indoors. They have not been out much for 3 months, a few short walks occasionally. So it's been a very intense time in terms of trying to get work done, always feeling like I'm not doing enough and I'm not making good use of this time. There's another idea that has popped up is if not now, when? So trying to look at some of the things that I have always pushed off to the future, organizing my archives, throwing work out, organizing my studio, trying to do that now. But another question would be helpful.
Well, I'm certainly thinking about all of these ways in which you can utilize this time being back indoors. Have there been any particular ways in which you've documented this time or marked the return to the indoors?
So about 3 weeks into the quarantine, staying indoors, I began to look around for a camera. My main camera was being repaired, and it was unfortunately, I left it to be repaired, so I didn't have it, but I had a smaller Nikon that I actually really like, a digital camera. And so I began to photograph out my window, which faces east on Lafayette Street. So I began to photograph Federal Express. This is from the 5th floor. So I'm looking down. I began a project, not really sure whether it will become a full-fledged body of work, but I began to photograph out my window. I began to photograph food messengers, food delivery people, pedestrians, people wearing masks, people not wearing masks. And then after the killing of George Floyd, I began to document the protests that would go up and down Lafayette Street and Grand Street and Center Street outside my window. So for the last 2.5 months, I've been documenting what's been happening out my window, first with COVID and then with the protests around social justice.
And I've noticed some of those on your Instagram, and I was wondering if your social media engagement has changed over the course of the pandemic. Previously on social media, I posted a lot of videos on trains and or things that interested me. I think I'm making fewer posts. I don't think my social media is an important gauge to my aesthetic life per se. I mean, I think I use social media the way many people do. It's not a precise forum that, say, an exhibition would be. It's more like a kind of look into things that I value, that I find interesting, that are, topical or current. But I don't feel that me, James Welling, my social media account is that significant in the bigger picture. That is, it's not, I know that someone like John Davola, who I'm a big fan of his work, he basically posts images of his work. And at the beginning of Instagram, I wasn't a big fan of artists who post just pictures of their work. But John, I think, has turned social media into, a platform for his work. I think that's very interesting. I follow a couple of other artists avidly. I follow many people. But I wouldn't say that my social media is at,
that different or important as opposed to other people.
Okay. Well, how do you feel about your sense of human connection? Has it shifted a bit during quarantine, and also with documenting what's going around you between the activities that are still going on during the pandemic as well as social justice protests?
Well, that's a multiple part question. First, I think a lot of people are surprised at how they don't miss going to art openings or art events. I miss going to museums. I miss seeing shows. But there are a lot of things that take away from creative time, social obligations. So there's a way that the enforced solitude is not a bad thing. It has separated me from, for instance, my Princeton community. George Floyd's killing happened, I think, after school ended in May. So we pretty much ended our Zoom. So one of the interesting things about COVID was the use of Zoom. That became a way that the Princeton faculty in the visual arts program, we met every week to talk about the changed landscape in our teaching, which was massive. I never in my wildest dreams ever thought I would teach, quote unquote, online. When I taught at UCLA, this was something that was just beginning as a movement, and the UCLA Department of Art faculty was absolutely against this, and I was too. The idea that you could teach visual art remotely. In 1 week, we had to, leap into this new environment, learn how to use Zoom, which luckily Princeton provided for us. Luckily, Princeton provided all of my students with Photoshop, so I was able to radically transform what was previously an analog photography class to a digital photography class, and just sort of forge ahead with my 10 students, most of whom lived in the East Coast, but I had a student who returned to China and a student who lived in India. So the whole Zoom experience teaching, that was a massive transformation. And then also working with the faculty every week, which was a more frequent connection than we would ever have had if we were on campus. So the interesting thing, in answer to the first question about social relations, I got to see the insides of everyone's residences, the staff and faculty, where they live, what backgrounds they chose to put up. So that was, very interesting from a sociological point of view. Zoom etiquette, learning how to handle yourself in a Zoom meeting. So that was, a fascinating experience. And it looks like I'm gearing up to teach again in the fall online. Even if Princeton comes back, because I'm 69 years old, even though I'm in fantastic health, in my opinion, I just don't want to risk commuting down to Princeton and teaching. So the whole Zoom experience. Now, I don't have a lot of close friends that I see very frequently. My wife has many more friends that she's always on the phone with or meeting up every week with. My life socially consists of my teaching and occasionally meeting with people from my gallery, David's Horner Gallery, and occasionally seeing friends, but it's a lot more isolated, they say, than my wife's. Interestingly, I now have a Tuesday Zoom call with a friend in England who I got to know a lot better in January when I was over there. And now we meet every Tuesday and converse and look at trains online. But mostly it's a conversation about what's going on in our lives and our teaching. And so in an interesting way, I also have a standing Zoom call now with my brother once a week, which is previously I would see him every couple of months. I mean, we enjoy each other's company, but now we speak more often. And I have another standing call with someone every couple of weeks, an art historian. So even though face-to-face, direct personal contact has been eliminated, I am keeping in touch to some extent in a different and more, just a different way. Now, around questions of, coming out of the social justice movement, Princeton, as I said, ended before this happened. So my class, my students in my analog/digital photography class were mostly working on issues around pandemic. How can you make art in a pandemic and not have it be about that to some extent? So school let out, and then the rallies and movement started. So I really didn't have to deal with that in teaching. One of the ways that I'm sort of involved with issues around Black Lives Matter and social justice is I'm on the board of a foundation, the Foundation for Contemporary Art, which over the last few years has really tried to improve both board members, getting a diverse board, and also extending the reach of the foundation into other communities that it hadn't reached before. And so this has been something that the board has been interested in and the staff have been working on. But the killing of George Floyd and defund the police and all of the demonstrations have really caused the foundation to start thinking about, A, should we issue a statement in support of social justice, and B, how can we change our core values statement and possibly deal with issues around that. So I've been involved in a couple of phone calls, and I've been thinking a lot about exclusivity in visual art. Maybe it's elitism, questions around experimentality, which the Foundation for Contemporary Art prioritizes experimental work. So thinking a lot about that. And the Foundation has been doing a really good job at reaching out to former recipients of their large grants and talking to them about how the foundation is perceived, and we're getting feedback from them. So my interaction with questions around social justice is as someone who's listening to a lot of this and watching, thinking about what the foundation should do, but I'm not an active participant. I'm someone who's actually learning a lot.
Well, I guess to sort of wrap it up, what memories or lessons do you think are the most urgent to document in this moment?
I forgot to mention the whole experience of clean air. The Green New Deal arrived many years too early and now is disappearing. I don't know. I think, my perspective on the pandemic and the protests, since I haven't participated in any because I'm worried about my health. My experience has been one that has been minimally impacted. I've been conceptually impacted, not being able to visit family members or travel, but still with a big backlog of work. So I think the impact for someone like me has been, I want to say minimal, but it would be very interesting to talk to an artist who has a straight job, a younger artist who is then finds themselves with lots of time on their hands and how to deal with that. I don't know, are you able to reach out to younger artists? I imagine your cutoff is probably toward more professional people who are not, struggling to make a living.
Well, part of this project is expanding the range a little bit to talk to younger artists who are less established.
Absolutely. That's super important because, as I said at the beginning, I am financially stable. My life, it's been a relief in a certain sense not to have to deal with certain social obligations. So I'm making hopefully good use of the studio time. I'm trying to read up on issues around social justice and Black aesthetics. So I'm probably the person who the pandemic has affected the least, or my class of artists who are financially secure. So I would really hope that you can find other younger artists, and I can provide you with some names if you'd like. Very young artists and other artists who are still working away at straight jobs, non-teaching jobs.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you, and we can mark this as the end of the interview.